Continued to remove potential evidence from the flat above a pub where Matthew Pyke was stabbed to death. But attention was also focused on the complex world of computer games and online forums.
Nottingham, England, 2008. 21-year-old Joanna Witton returned to the flat she shared with her partner of 3 years, 20-year-old Matthew Pyke. She entered and turned on the light to see blood covering the floor of the living room. As she walked into the dining room, she found the body of her partner on the floor. He had been stabbed a shocking amount of times, something that could only be considered overkill. On the side of his computer were 3 letters written in blood, seemingly by Matthew himself. D-A-V. Soon after this, Joanna received a message on Facebook which read, "I'm sorry for having caused so much trouble lately. I hope you won't lose all your hope. We will be there for you." She knew immediately who had done this, and a huge manhunt was now underway, one that would travel overseas all the way to Limburg, just outside Frankfurt in Germany. 20-year-old Matthew Pyke lived on North Sherwood Street, just above a pub in the city centre of Nottingham. He had moved over from Suffolk after dropping out of his physics course at university, but had made plans to re-enrol at Nottingham Trent and was keen to finish his studies. His mother said he was modest, witty and easygoing with a huge love of technology. He spent a lot of his time on his computer building websites and talking on forums. On the internet he went by the name Shade, and his girlfriend Joanna was known as Jojo. Matthew and Joanna spent a lot of time playing a Nintendo game called Advance Wars, a chess-like turn-based strategy game centred around defeating opposing armies on different maps, with various mini-tasks in between. Matthew and Joanna often used the now inactive website Advance Wars Bunker. Another user that frequented the site as well was someone under the name Eagle the Lightning, and this user talked to Matthew and Joanna a lot. After Advance Wars Bunker closed down, Matthew, Joanna, and a user by the name of Eggy created and began managing a site called Wars Central. Wars Central was focused on the Nintendo Wars series of games: Advance Wars, Battalion Wars, Game Boy Wars, and Famicom Wars. It gave the community that loved the games a place to come together, trading strategies and advice. They quickly developed a small but very loyal following. Eagle the Lightning followed Matthew and Joanna over to Wars Central, spending up to 8 hours a day on the forum. Before long, it became clear that this user had other motives for spending so much time on there. They had developed a fixation with Joanna that was escalating by the day. The user told people they thought her ginger hair made her more intelligent, and along with her love of gaming and technology, they believed Joanna was their perfect match. Over the coming weeks and months, the contact between this user and Matthew and Joanna became a constant and very exhausting thing. This user was soon discovered to be a German man, 21-year-old David Heiss. Little was known about David to the other users, and he kept a lot of his life hidden and separate from his online world. What we do know is that he was the eldest of 2 children, and after his parents' divorce he went to live with his grandparents. The relationship with his mother and father grew more and more strained, and they eventually stopped speaking almost altogether. He was described as very insular and introverted, with few friends, but he was an exceptional student, excelling in all his classes. He was desperate to attend university but was unable to afford it, and decided to join the military instead. Just 2 weeks after joining, he was discharged due to what the military described as not being mentally suitable. He started an apprenticeship at a textiles company, and when he wasn't doing that, he was guaranteed to be on Wars Central. He added Joanna on Facebook, totalling his number of friends to 15. The other 14 were all from different parts of the world, presumably being other people he had met online. He would spend a lot of time going through Joanna's profile and messaging her via any outlet he could, sometimes hundreds of times a day. He soon announced his love for her, and despite Matthew being very much in the picture, he only became more blatant with his feelings. He sent her a Facebook message that read, "I love you, Jojo, more than anything else in my life. I shouldn't, but I can't help it. And to be honest, it's a great feeling. You're my first thought when I wake up, and the last one when I go to sleep." Joanna repeatedly ignored his messages and tried not to worry about it too much, thinking the obsession would soon wear off. After all, David was hundreds of miles away in a different country, and Joanna and Matthew were always very careful and private about their personal lives. Joanna said she never worried about anyone finding out where they lived, as it was not information they revealed or ever put out there on any platform. But in June of 2008, Matthew and Joanna went on a short holiday. To their shock, they arrived back at their flat to find David Heiss standing outside the front door waiting for them. Conveniently, he said he had no money with him and nowhere to stay. When they asked him how he found out where they'd lived, he claimed Joanna had once posted it on her Facebook page, something which Joanna couldn't ever remember or imagine doing. Understandably unnerved by this, Joanna started ringing around some local hostels to try and book him somewhere to stay. But when they had no luck, David insisted he just stay with them. He slept on the floor in their room in a sleeping bag. Joanna recalled not sleeping that night, as every time she looked over, he was wide awake and staring at her. David stayed with them for 3 days before Joanna convinced him to head off and meet some more of his online friends while he was in the UK. After 3 weeks of travelling around, he finally returned to Germany. Matthew, who had now reached his limit, contacted him and said, "I hate you for ever laying eyes on the girl I've dedicated my life to. I hate you for your desperation." Matthew then took to the War Central forum and put out a post called "The 19 Reasons Why I Hate David Heiss." David was humiliated and infuriated, and despite his attempts to change people's minds, other users began distancing themselves from him too. Just weeks later, David took his uncle's car to drive to the couple's home again. While he was travelling down the motorway, he collided with a truck. This was no deterrent, however, and as soon as he was deemed fit to leave the hospital, he headed over to the flat, just as he had planned. Enough was enough, and the couple sent him away. They knew they had to cut him off completely, and blocked him from accessing the War's Central forum. Many other users cut off contact with him as well. Joanna emailed the troubling David, urging him to seek help and go and talk to a therapist. David replied, "Joe, one day I will break my promise and come back to Nottingham and offer you a knife or something and tell you to kill me because I don't want to live without you." For the next 2 months, the shaken pair heard nothing from David Heiss. But in early September, Matthew received an email from him. It read, "There's something I would like to give to you. I'm not going to say what it is though. You will love it." On September 18th, 2008, David's obsession would take its darkest turn yet. He packed some warm clothes, some gardening gloves, and a knife, before boarding a plane from Germany to England via Amsterdam, his 3rd trip in 3 months. When he arrived, he stayed in the station for a while, looking for a tram to get. When he realised they were no longer running, he proceeded to walk through the town at 1 a.m. When he reached North Sherwood Street, he got onto the roof of the couple's flat and slept behind an air conditioning unit all night. That same evening, Joanna and Matthew celebrated their 3-year anniversary. At 6:55 a.m, David watched Joanna leave for work before forcing his way into the flat. He launched a savage and prolonged attack on Matthew, stabbing him a total of 86 times. It was clear from the location of the blood that he had chased Matthew around the flat for a while, with Matthew stumbling into walls and doors as he had tried to escape. After this, he threw some clothes and belongings around the flat, presumably attempting to make it look like a burglary, before he fled the area, leaving Matthew for dead. In Matthew's final moments, he crawled over to his computer and wrote DAV, the first 3 letters of David's name, in his own blood on the side of the monitor. A truly heartbreaking thought, but Matthew's immense determination to identify David and tell people what had happened showcased his strength until the very end. He succumbed to his numerous injuries shortly thereafter. Before catching his 1:20 p.m. flight, David walked up and down the street, dumping things in different bins. When analysing the CCTV, it was clear that David was struggling to walk, partly due to a cut on his leg that had happened during the fight, and partly because the shoes he was determined to be wearing in the clip weren't his. His own shoes were covered in blood, and without a spare pair, he had taken Matthew's, which were a few sizes too small. He also disposed of the knife, which was never found, before getting on a flight home, just 16 hours after landing in the United Kingdom. It appeared that David had wanted to make the murder look like Matthew had taken his own life. In an attempt to give himself an alibi, he asked his sister to log onto some sites under his Eagle the Lightning username. In his suitcase were 2 suicide notes, one for him and one that was made to look like Matthew had written it. But for whatever reason, he didn't leave any notes at the scene. Police theorised that due to how bloody and violent the scene was, there was simply no way that anyone would believe Matthew could have done that to himself. There was no other possible suspect, and police began corresponding with the authorities in Lindbergh to track down David Heiss. Joanna had given them a huge amount of information, including the car crash he was in while driving to their home. As the authorities had been involved in this, his address was soon located. He was arrested 4 days later and stayed in custody awaiting extradition to the United Kingdom.
Police continued to remove potential evidence from the flat above a pub where Matthew Pyke was stabbed to death. But attention was also focused on the complex world of computer games and online forums, and in particular, a military strategy game called Advance Wars. Matthew Pyke, a 20-year-old student, ran a website for people to discuss the game, helped by his girlfriend Joanna Witton. A few days after she discovered his body, a German computer game enthusiast, calling himself David Heiss, left a message on her Facebook page. The message said, "You must be suffering unbelievable pain. I'm sorry for causing so much trouble lately." This led Nottinghamshire police to Germany, and legal efforts are underway to bring their suspect back to Britain. Police believe Matthew Pyke knew his killer. They're now examining the possibility that they met on the internet. Police have appealed for the public's help in trying to find the murder weapon. They've also asked people to be on the lookout for any discarded clothing which could be heavily bloodstained. The victim's website is no longer active, but it bears a message from a friend who says, "I hope whoever did this to you is brought to justice swiftly." David Crabtree, Sky News, Nottingham.
In a final callous act of desperation, he wrote a letter to Joanna from prison, telling her he hoped they could be together when everything was over. David quickly admitted to killing Matthew, claiming self-defence, but police had numerous amounts of evidence that pointed to it being very much a premeditated killing. A search of his house showed the suitcase that he was seen travelling with, and inside it was the pair of bloody gardening gloves he had worn that day. During David's trial, he stuck to his story. Matthew was the aggressor, and David had stabbed him to defend himself. He said that he had travelled to England to confront Matthew and Joanna after they had started abusing him online. He said that he wanted to scare Matthew in the hopes that it would stop what he referred to as constant hostilities. "He charged at me. I was trying to push his arms away so they wouldn't make contact with me. He lost the knife when it fell to the floor near the table. He tried to crawl towards it, but I tried to prevent it by sitting on him. After a few seconds I got hold of it. He started kicking me in the back and he was looking at me angrily. I was lucky that I was still alive. I don't know if it was adrenaline, but I managed to get my arm away, and then I stabbed him." The prosecution said this was totally convoluted, and the placement of blood at the scene, as well as the fact that apart from the small cut, David had no injuries, told a very clear and different story. Mr. Justice Keith told David, "The fact your motive for the murder was so bizarre doesn't make your killing of Matthew any less serious. The tragedy is that you are unable to cope with rejection." In May 2009, David Heiss was found guilty of the murder of Matthew Pyke and was given a life sentence with the minimum term of 18 years that he must serve before he can be considered for parole. None of David Heiss's family were present for the trial. Matthew's family issued a statement. "We will never truly come to terms with what happened to Matthew that morning. While we have wanted justice throughout the course of this trial, all we really want is Matthew back with us. There will always be a massive part of our family missing, and not a day goes by without us thinking about Matthew and what might have been. It's not fair that we should all have to live like this for the rest of our lives because of one man's actions. He has taken a wonderful, caring, loving young man from all of us. We hope this verdict will give us some kind of closure so that we can try and move on with our lives. But that is easier said than done." Joanna and Eggy continued running Wars Central for a while, where they made a tribute page for Matthew, which was always flooded with people sharing their memories and love for him. They went on to create Wars Wiki, the encyclopedia for all Nintendo Wars games. It was made as a dedication and a tribute to Matthew Pyke.